Okay, imagine this. What if your map, your everyday map, also included volcano gods and talking birds and these islands out beyond the sea where immortals lived?
This is pretty wild, right? Like something out of pure fantasy.
Exactly. But for the ancient Chinese, this wasn't just fantasy. It was kind of a vision of their world. And they actually wrote it all down in this incredible text, the Shan Hai Jing, the classic of mountains and seas.
That's it. And today, yeah, we're going to dive deep into it.
Because it's not your typical dusty history book, is it?
Not at all. The Shan Hai Jing gives us this really vibrant, sometimes frankly bizarre glimpse into how the ancient Chinese saw the world around them. Not just the land, but how they populated with their beliefs, their myths, their wildest imaginings.
It's like a window straight into their worldview.
A really unique window, yeah.
And it's fascinating because it wasn't just one person's idea, right? This
Yeah.
thing has a history. It wasn't just written by one author sitting alone somewhere.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's a compilation. It's like a collection of stories and knowledge that built up over, well, centuries, really.
And inside its 18 chapters, you find this amazing mix, things we'd separate today, like geography, mythology,
Right. The stories of gods and heroes.
and even ethnography, descriptions of different peoples.
Exactly. And it shows just how connected all those ways of thinking were back then. They didn't necessarily see them as separate fields like we do.
So in this deep dive, we're going to try and figure out, okay, who might have put this together? Over what huge span of time did it actually take shape? And what kind of, well, mind-bending stuff is actually in it, this whole idea of mythic geography?
Yeah, the creatures, the places.
We'll look at the real places that might have inspired some of it, why they even created it, how it was used, and how it went from being this strange text to, a classic.
And ultimately, why does this ancient book, full of gods and monsters, still matter? Why is it so important for understanding the ancient Chinese perspective?
And why it still kind of resonates. It offers this unparalleled look at how they made sense of everything, blurring that line between what was real and what was imagined. It's captivating.
It really is.
Okay, so mythic maps, gods, monsters. My first reaction is, what kind of actual information are we talking about here? It can't all be just, dragons and spirits, can it?
That's a really good question. And what's so fascinating is exactly that blend. It's not purely one thing. You absolutely get descriptions of mountains, rivers, even the resources you might find there.
Like minerals or plants.
Yeah, minerals, plants, jade, cinnabar, almost like very early kind of gazetteer or geographical index or resource list. But then, woven right into that description, you'll suddenly find, oh, and there's a mythical beast living here, or a particular god is associated with this mountain.
Wow, just like that, side by side.
Completely seamless. It's this integration of the seemingly practical with the totally fantastical that makes it unique. And it really gives us a key insight into how they saw the world, not separated, but integrated.
This idea of a world where fact and fantasy just live together makes you wonder about where it came from. You said not a single author. So who do we think actually put it together?
Well, the traditional stories, the legends, they link it to some really foundational figures. We're talking Emperor Yu the Great.
Everyone who tamed the flood.
That's the one. And his minister, Boyi, sometimes just called Yi. Early historians like Sima Qin, they mention the book. And then a Han Dynasty scholar, Lu Xun, well, actually Lu Xiang first, then Lu Xun elaborated. They suggested Yu and Boyi themselves wrote it way, way back in the Xia Dynasty.
So attaching it to these legendary heroes, that gives it serious weight, doesn't it? Instant ancient authority.
Precisely. But, as time went on, scholars started looking at that a bit more critically. By the Tang Dynasty and certainly by the Qing Dynasty, people were getting skeptical about these mythical authors.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and a Qing scholar named Big Yuan, he came up with a theory that feels more plausible. He suggested different parts were written by different people at different times. Maybe the mountains chapters were oldest, perhaps closer to Yu's time, but the beyond the seas and great wilderness sections probably add later, maybe Qin or Han Dynasty.
Right, reflecting maybe a growing empire or expanding knowledge. So what's the thinking now among scholars?
The general consensus now among sinologists, the specialists, is that, yeah, the Shan Hai Jing evolved. Multiple contributors over a really long period. We're talking roughly from the Warring States period, maybe starting 5th or 4th century BCE, all the way into the early Han Dynasty, ending around the 1st or 2nd century CE.
Wow, centuries.
Exactly. Think of it
Right.
like an anthology of lore. Stuff gathered from storytellers, travelers' reports, maybe scholarly notes, all collected over generations. It's a collective tapestry, really.
Almost like a wiki of ancient Chinese world knowledge built over time.
In a way.
Yeah.
And we do know some key people involved in preserving it. Lu Xiang in the Western Han, he was the first known editor. He cataloged it for the Imperial Library, which was crucial. Without that, it might have just disappeared.
Okay, so he saved it, essentially.
He played a huge role. And then later, 3rd century CE, you get Guo Pu, Western Jin Dynasty scholar. His commentary, his detailed annotations, they became the definitive guide for centuries. People relied on his interpretation.
So Guoku kind of locked it down and explained it for everyone else.
Pretty much. His notes show he likely had access to earlier versions, maybe different manuscripts. His work really helped solidify the text and how people understood it. So yeah, not one single author, but this rich, layered work built by many hands over a huge sweep of history.
That compilation process sounds like it took ages. Can we sort of pin down a rough timeline? When did different bits come together?
We can piece together a pretty decent picture, yeah.
Yeah.
As we said, some of the core stuff, especially in those mountains chapters, the ones that feel a bit more grounded.
The ones with the resources and stuff.
Exactly. That material might go back as far as the 4th century BCE. That lines up with the Warring States period, when different states were actively exploring, mapping, figuring out their territories. So those early parts might have had a more practical origin.
Tied to actual exploration and surveying. Makes sense.
Could be. And we know the first time the name Shan Hai Jing pops up in historical records is around the 1st century BCE. Sima Qian mentions it. So by the Western Han, the book, or at least its title, was known.
Okay, so it's on the map by then, so to speak.
Right. And then chapters seem to have been added or integrated over time. There's actually an editorial note, a postscript, attached to some parts dated around 6 BCE, likely added by court officials reviewing the text.
6 BCE, that's pretty specific.
It's a great clue. It tells us a big chunk of it was compiled and officially looked at by then. And the basic 18-chapter structure we have today, that seems to have been largely set by the Han era.
So layers then. Warring states for the mountains, maybe?
That's the general idea. Warring states for the core mountain surveys, then maybe Qin and Han periods for the more fantastical stuff, the beyond the seas, the great wilderness, as China's view of the world expanded, geographically and imaginatively.
You mentioned Chapter 12 having Han officials' names. How does that fit?
Yeah, that's key evidence. Chapter 12, the North Within the Seas part, it actually ends by listing the names of some Han officials from right around that 6 BCE mark. That strongly suggests that section, at least, was updated or finalized then.
Got it. And the whole thing, how long is it?
In its current form, it's roughly 31,000 Chinese characters. That's a lot of text to accumulate over maybe 6, 7, even 8 centuries.
That is a long time for one book to grow.
It really is. And it's cool because this time frame connects with archaeology.
Right.
We've actually found ancient Chinese maps from the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, so we know they were charting mountains and rivers back then. That could easily be the kind of raw material that went into the early Shan Hai Jing. So, yeah, by the early Han, maybe 1st century CE, the text was mostly in the shape we know. Though maybe some of the really mythical great wilderness bits got finalized a bit later. And don't forget Guo Pu, back in the 4th century CE. He even mentions filling in a gap in one chapter using other sources he had, like a curator.
So a long, slow buildup of knowledge, legend, and maybe some practical surveying, too.
Exactly, a gradual accretion.
Okay, so we've got this complex book, built over centuries by many hands. Let's get inside. What's it actually like? What journey does it take you on?
Oh, it's like stepping into another reality, really, where the totally normal and the utterly bizarre just exist right next to each other. As we said, 18 chapters, organized by theme and direction.
Right, the directions.
Yeah, those first 5 chapters, the classics of the mountains, they're arranged by the 5 directions, south, west, north, east, and the center. Very systematic. They list mountains, give their names, locations, distances.
That's almost like a geographical survey.
It does. But it's way more than that. It lists the plants, trees, minerals found there, the jade, cinnabar, gold we mentioned, hints of resource mapping.
Okay, practical. But then,
right alongside that, you get descriptions of the strange creatures and the gods believed to live on those exact same mountains. The text might say, jade grows here, and in the next breath, and there's a beast with an ox body and a human face that bellows like thunder.
just stated as fact.
Pretty much. This matter-of-fact blend is what's so striking. And sometimes you even get ritual instructions, like how to sacrifice to the mountain spirits to make sure you can pass through safely. It gives you these flashes of ancient shamanic practices tied directly to the landscape.
That's incredible. A world just teeming with resources and spirits. How does the focus change as you move through the book? Does it stay that practical?
Oh, it broadens out massively. Chapter 6 to 9, the classics of regions beyond the seas. Now we're venturing out beyond the central known world, and things get way more fantastical. It's almost
Right.
like fictional ethnology.
Fictional ethnology, what does that mean?
Well, instead of familiar plants, you get descriptions of incredibly strange peoples. People with dog heads or only one leg, or folks who chirp like birds. The focus shifts away from resources and rituals towards mythic genealogies, legends connected to these really distant places. The further out you go in the Shan Hai Jing, the more reality seems to just dissolve.
So the edges of their world were literally filled with their wildest ideas.
That's a great way to put it. Then chapters 10 to 13, the classics of regions within the seas, they're kind of a bridge. Still peripheral lands, fringe cultures, but maybe a bit closer to home than the really wild stuff. You still get bizarre creatures and distant clans, but maybe more connection to the known. Then you get the great wilderness chapters, 14 to 17. These are just, wow, creation myths, the most outlandish marvels you can imagine, all happening out of the absolute edges of the cosmos. And finally, Chapter 18 is just a short add-on.
It sounds less like one single story and more like snapshots, little glimpses.
Exactly that. It's not a continuous narrative epic. Instead, you get hundreds of these short, sometimes just a few lines long, ancient myths scattered throughout, like little entries in a mythic atlas.
So famous legends are in there, too.
Oh yeah, foundational ones. The great Taming the Flood, it's in there, briefly. Kuo-fu, the guy who chased the sun and died of thirst, becoming a forest. Jingwei, the little bird endlessly trying to fill the sea with pebbles. Even Nua, the serpent-bodied goddess who fixed the sky, she appears. Later illustrations often show her with a human head and snake torso, drawing directly from these descriptions.
So these core myths are embedded right into this geographical, fantastical map.
They are. And think about something like the nine-headed phoenix Jufeng. A fiery bird, 9 human faces, lives way up north. It perfectly shows that blend. A mythical creature tied to a specific, if mythical, location.
This paints a picture of a really distinct way of seeing the world. Can you unpack that underlying worldview a bit more?
Absolutely. The basic structure, the worldview in the Shan Hai Jing, is built on concentric realms. Imagine circles radiating out. At the very center, you have the 9 provinces. That's the core, the civilized Chinese world as they understood it. Around that, there's the zone of the 4 seas. Think of that as a boundary.
Like an ocean or...
Could be oceans, could be big lakes, deserts, marshes, basically the limit of the familiar world. And then beyond those seas, you get the great wilderness, this vast, blurry zone where geography and myth just completely merge. That's where the really strange beings, the powerful gods, the echoes of creation, all reside.
So it's like a gradient, from ordered and known at the center to increasingly weird and unknown further out.
Precisely. This layered model was their way of organizing space. Closer in, more detail, more seemingly factual stuff. Further out, more wonder, maybe more danger, more myth. It really reinforces that idea of China as the middle kingdom, the civilized center, surrounded by increasing levels of the exotic or the strange.
Kind of like old European maps with, here be dragons at the edges.
It's a similar impulse, yeah. Like medieval bestiaries or books of marvels cataloging weird stuff in faraway lands. What the Shan Hai Jing really preserves is this ancient Chinese cosmology. A universe where spirits and monsters are real parts of the geography, especially at the fringes, while the center is defined by order, ritual, and the human realm under heaven.
Okay, so this mental map, these circles filled with mountains and monsters, where are these places supposed to be in the real world?
That's where it gets really interesting. The book claims to survey all under heaven, you know, the whole known world of its time. Those early mountains chapters, they read a bit like a travelogue. And they probably do correspond roughly to actual mountain ranges in ancient China.
Like in specific provinces we know today?
Yeah, likely areas in modern Henan, Hubei, Shaanxi, places like that. The names in the text are often different, but the descriptions listing mountains in sequence within a direction, noting rivers flowing out of them, what's downstream, it strongly suggests real geographical knowledge, maybe based on actual maps or itineraries people used.
The format itself sounds like directions.
It does. Mount X is so many lines northwest of Mount Y. That consistent structure points towards a connection with the tangible landscape.
So the early parts might have had a pretty solid geographical basis.
It seems likely. But then you get into the Beyond Seas chapters, and pinning locations down on a modern map gets much, much harder. and that feels deliberate. These are lands beyond those four seas that supposedly circled the known world.
And sea didn't always mean ocean.
Right. It could be big lakes, vast marshes, deserts, essentially, the symbolic boundary of the known. Beyond that boundary, reality and fantasy just start to beautifully blur together.
Does it mention any places we can identify today? Any recognizable names?
It does, actually, which is fascinating. For instance, the classic of regions within the seas in North, that's chapter 12. It contains one of the earliest known Chinese references to the land of Wo,
Ooh.
an ancient name for Japan. It's mentioned fairly matter-of-factly alongside other foreign peoples. This tells us that by the Han Dynasty, when this chapter was likely finalized, Chinese geographical knowledge had definitely expanded eastward across the sea.
That's a huge detail. It shows the map evolving.
Exactly. And it mentions other distant groups, too. Names that might possibly reflect some awareness, however vague, of peoples in Central Asia, maybe Siberia, Southeast Asia. It hints at expanding horizons.
This layering of real and imagined places makes me think about the politics. How does the Shan Hai Jing reflect maybe the power structures of ancient China?
Oh, absolutely. That's a really key point. The text definitely mirrors the political worldview of a state that's consolidating, becoming an empire. The central lands, the Chinese heartland, described with detail, precision. It's clearly the power center.
The known, controlled world.
Right. But as you move outwards in the text, the descriptions become, well, increasingly fantastical, increasingly decentered. It's like the ordered world of the heartland gives way to regions defined by strangeness, marvels, maybe even chaos.
Can you give some examples of that contrast?
Sure. So in the southern beyond sea areas, you read about giant snakes or these mythical people who mine magical cinnabar.
Yeah.
That might echo some early awareness of resource-rich areas, maybe modern Yunnan or further south, but it's framed as extraordinary, exotic. Or look west, you get the Queen Mother of the West, Xuangmu, living on this paradise mountain, Mount Kunlun. That perhaps reflects how the distant West, maybe Central Asia, maybe Tibet, was seen as this mystical source of divine power and longevity.
And the north and east.
The North, as we mentioned, has creatures like the nine-headed phoenix, descriptions of vast, cold wildernesses. The East often features islands of immortals out in the sea, powerful ocean gods, strange coastal races.
So it's like the further from the center, the wilder and more magical it gets.
Exactly. Familiarity and order decrease with distance. And it's interesting, some of these bizarre accounts might even originate from real travelers' tales, just distorted over time.
Like a game of telephone across continents.
Kind of. Maybe descriptions of people with really long arms swinging in trees were garbled accounts of gibbons. Maybe mentions of a creature called a lin were super early. Mythologized reports of giraffes brought through trade, which later got tied to the auspicious Quilin myth.
Wow.
So the Shan Hai Jing isn't just a physical map. It's mapping the mental landscape of ancient China. It draws a clear line between the civilized center and the magical, sometimes dangerous periphery. And this definitely reinforces Chinese centrality order here, increasing chaos and magic out there.
And there's a ritual aspect, too.
Yeah, definitely. Just the act of naming all these places, these beings, putting them into one comprehensive text, especially during the Han Dynasty's empire-building phase, it's a way of culturally claiming those spaces, bringing all under heaven, known and imagined, into one unified scheme. It's this incredible mix. Real geography, genuine curiosity about other peoples, and deep cosmic myth all rolled into one.
It seems like this book could have been used for so many different things. What do we think its original purposes actually were? Why make it?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? The purpose of the Shan Hai Jing has puzzled people for centuries. Was it a travel guide, a shaman's handbook, a collection of myths? And the most likely answer is probably all of the above, to some extent.
A multi-tool of ancient knowledge.
Something like that. Remember the legend about Emperor Yu and Boyi surveying the land after the flood? That story itself suggests an origin tied to geography for governance, for knowing the land and its resources. So, yeah, it could absolutely function as a kind of early gazetteer, a resource manual for rulers, knowing where the minerals and useful plants were.
Practical information, then.
Definitely an element of that. But then you have all the myths, the spirits, the ritual instructions that point strongly towards a shamanic or religious use, too.
How so?
Well, the rituals for dealing with local spirits, the detailed catalog of all these strange beings. It could easily have been a guide for shamans, the Wu, who mediated between the human and spirit worlds. Lu Xun, the famous modern writer, called it a shamanic text, highlighting those roots in ancient spirituality. And that animistic worldview where spirits inhabit mountains and rivers, knowing about them, knowing their names and habits, That's a form of power.
Like a field guide to the supernatural.
Kind of, yeah. And modern scholars suggest other things, too. Maybe a guide for travelers, even if the travels were only in the imagination. Maybe an encyclopedia of ancient knowledge. Or even a book of omens.
Omens, how?
Interestingly, in the Han Dynasty Imperial Library, it was cataloged under Singfa, which relates to shape methods or unusual phenomena, prodigies, portents. This suggests it might have been consulted for statecraft, perhaps to interpret strange events or sightings as messages from heaven.
Wow. Okay, so practical, spiritual, political.
And maybe philosophical too. It presents this unified model of the world, right? And the myths themselves could carry metaphorical weight. Kuafu chasing the sun, maybe a warning about ambition. The Jingwei bird, maybe a symbol of perseverance.
So who would actually be using this text? It sounds pretty specialized.
Probably not the average person on the street, no. The audience was likely scholars, officials, bibliophiles, ritual specialists, maybe storytellers mining it for material, Taoist recluses interested in sacred geography, possibly even healers looking for information on exotic plants or substances.
So a literate, probably elite audience?
Mostly, yes. And we know it resonated with writers. The famous Jin Dynasty poet Tao Yunming wrote poems titled Reading the Shan Hai Jing. That shows it was seen by the educated elite as a source of deep reflection, of inspiration.
So it really was this multi-purpose thing.
I think that's the best way to see it. A mythical atlas, a spiritual guide, a scholarly archive, maybe even a source of political wisdom, all bundled together. Its ambiguity, its refusal to fit neatly into one genre, might even be part of its enduring power.
It's incredible that something so complex and, frankly, weird survived and became a classic. How did that happen? How did it get that revered status?
Yeah, its journey to classic status wasn't straightforward. It was gradual. In ancient times, like we said, it had this sort of dubious position. People respected its age, felt it held ancient wisdom, but they were also skeptical about the monsters and magic.
Like Sima Qian being cautious.
Exactly. He basically said, yeah, this book mentions weird stuff, I'm not touching that. But crucially, it was included in the Han Dynasty Imperial Library catalogs by Liu Shang. That act of including it, preserving it within the official collection, was vital.
So even if people weren't sure what to make of it, they knew it was old and important enough to keep.
Pretty much. But the real game changer was Guo Pu, back in the 3rd, 4th century CE. His huge commentary, his detailed notes, his cross-referencing it with other texts. He treated it with serious scholarly respect. And his approach really elevated its status, helped canonize it. His annotated version became the standard one everyone used.
So Guo Pu basically vouched for it, academically.
In a big way. Now, that doesn't mean everyone suddenly believed in one-legged people. In later periods, like the Tang and Song dynasties, it was sometimes seen more as just a book of legends, maybe pushed to the margins a bit compared to Confucian classics. But it never vanished. It was too unique, too ancient.
Kept popping up.
Yeah, Tang poets and writers still refer to it. Song encyclopedias include material from it. And then Song dynasty printing technology. That was huge.
How so?
Printing made books cheaper and more widely available. And illustrated editions of the Shan Hai Jing started appearing. Imagine seeing woodcuts of the nine-headed phoenix or Nua. That really popularized it, made it a source for artists, broadened its cultural impact beyond just scholars.
The pictures brought the weirdness to life for more people.
Definitely. Then, fast forward to the Qing dynasty, there's another surge of interest from scholars. It gets included in the massive Siku Quanshu, the big imperial library project.
Yeah.
Okay, it was put in the Yaoshua section, minor narratives or fiction, but still, it was in there.
So acknowledged, even if categorized as strange tales.
Right. And one Qing scholar famously called it the ancestor of all strange tales, recognizing its importance for that whole genre of Chinese literature. And scholars kept studying it for clues about historical geography, ancient myths, symbolism.
And what about more recently? How's it viewed now?
The 20th and 21st centuries have seen another boost, actually, from archaeologists and historians. Sometimes excavated texts or sites seem to corroborate little details in the Shan Hai Jing, which lends more weight to the idea that behind the fantasy, there might be kernels of real ancient practices or memories of real places.
So finding hints of reality within the myth.
Exactly. And today, it's firmly a classic, part of China's cultural heritage, studied in schools, source material for movies, games, art. It's seen as this foundational text for mythology, ancient geography, understanding that ancient worldview. And all those layers of commentary over the centuries just add to its richness.
It's gone from this mysterious, debated text to a cultural treasure.
Absolutely. It's kind of like China's Epic of Gilgamesh or Odyssey in terms of its foundational status and its blend of myth and journey. And its survival is really a testament to China's continuous textual tradition, but also just a basic human fascination with the marvelous, the unknown, the edges of the map,
It really is unique. A bestiary, a map, a spiritual guide.
all in one. Peerless, really.
Wow. Okay, this whole deep dive has been fascinating. Thinking about the Shan Hai Jing, what surprised you the most about it? About how the ancient Chinese imagined their world through it?
Hmm. What surprised me most, I think it's that seamlessness we talked about. How effortlessly they wove together the practical, the geography, the resources with the utterly fantastical. The
Yeah.
gods, the monsters, the rituals. It
Yeah.
wasn't like two separate worlds, it was just the world. It really challenges our modern need to compartmentalize everything.
Yeah, that struck me too. For me, I think it's the sheer timescale. This idea that it wasn't one person's vision, but this collective project over centuries. Different people adding layers, observations, stories. Like this slow, organic growth of a shared understanding, or maybe a shared collection of wonders. It says so much about how knowledge and stories were passed down and built upon.
That's a great point. And what moved me, I think, was the sheer imaginative power. The insight it gives into how they made sense of their cosmos, their place within it. These weren't just bedtime stories, they were fundamental to their understanding of reality, their relationship with the land, the spirits, the unknown. It's quite profound.
It really makes you think. Our modern raps are so precise, so scientific, but what do they still leave in shadow? What parts of our world, maybe cultural landscapes, spiritual dimensions, the things we don't know, aren't captured by lines of longitude and latitude?
That is a really provocative question for our listeners. What do you think? What does the Shan Hai Jing make you wonder about our own maps, our own ways of understanding the world? We'd love to hear your thoughts and interpretations.